Everybody have a good time at the party last night? Oh, some of us. So thank you, Jesse. I'm talking about JIRA Workflows. Just to give you a little bit of context, I'm a sales engineer, and what that means is anyone who has a functional question about any of our products, if you send an email or call one of our offices, you usually end up at my team, and I focus on JIRA. And I've been here for about 2 years, and I talk to a couple dozen people a day, whether they're brand new to Atlassian, new to JIRA, or they've been using our tools for a long time. So this is kind of just a collection of highlights and lessons learned from all those conversations. This is just here to let you know what's going on. We're going to cover some of the basics just so we're all on the same page, and then we'll dive in and talk about what you need to know when you build workflows for your own process. I also have a PDF guide that I created. I don't have them printed out for everybody, but if you go to the Summit website, the agenda, if you click on the header for this talk, there's a link where you can download it. It's 12 pages, so just 6 front and back. These are the most common examples of workflows that people ask me about all the time. And if you've built workflows in JIRA, you may know that you have to do things in a certain order. So these walk you through step by step exactly what you need to add to configure a lot of these commonly requested workflows. So it's worth downloading. The examples that I'm going to talk about are all in here as well. And if you can't find it, grab an Atlassian, send me an email, find somebody, and they'll find me, and I'll get you a copy. So I hesitate actually to even call workflow a feature. I think that it supersedes that title. I tell people that JIRA is a workflow engine. Workflow is anything and everything within JIRA itself. So a couple of examples here. This is a workflow that we've got internally. If you need to do something where, you know, if it's $7,000, it needs to get sent to Bob for approval, and if it's $12,000, then only Steve can approve it. You can set that up in JIRA. We have a kudos set up in our JIRA as well, so anybody can actually give somebody else a pat on the back, a thank you, a hey, great job on that project. Christina, you had an awesome presentation at Summit, so I want to give you some movie tickets. So we have that set up. Anything that you need, I have a lot of conversations with people who aren't in the software development world at all, a lot of my friends, people that I meet, and when I try to explain to them what JIRA does, I say anything that you have, where you have a piece of paper, a form you want to fill out, you have to give that to somebody, they give it to somebody else, a process happens around that, you can do that within JIRA. We have hundreds of employees at Atlassian, and a lot of them, a good amount of them, are software developers. And they not only write code on our tools, but they also have side projects. They work on open source projects that have something to do with our tools. And we needed a way to formalize that Atlassian as a company recognizes, yes, you work on this open source project, and no, we don't own it. So it's just kind of a matter of Mike and Scott's giving a thumbs up, but we built that in JIRA so that we have a permanent record. This is an audit trail. It's stored forever. 10 years from now, we can go and look and see that this one little project, this one guy filed a long time ago, yes, it was approved. So anything that you need to track, an audit trail, store a permanent record, you can build a workflow for that as well. So like I mentioned, a lot of business processes that have nothing to do with software development, anything that there's a process, someone has to capture some data and do something with it, you can build a JIRA workflow for that. So there are some key concepts that you want to understand about any process before you start to map that out. And these will help you actually understand better how your team works. So this first concept is the concept of push versus pull. So a push process is something where I've created this task, I then assign it to the next person, and now it's in their hands. Somebody always owns something until I manually hand it off to somebody else. The opposite of that is this pull process. So a good example, if you've ever used our support system, support.atlassian.com, you can create a support ticket for any of our products, and as soon as you hit create, that says unassigned. Those go into this holding area, and our support engineers can see on all of their JIRA dashboards what's coming up next, what they can go in, they can pull out individual tickets and work on them themselves. Or if you have a manager who wants to go in, take 15 items and triage them out to people, that's also this pull process. So JIRA workflows can be built for either of these, but you want to know which one you're building before you start building it. Another concept is open versus restricted. So do you have a very linear, strict process that something has to follow, has to go in these certain steps in this order, or can people skip steps? This might be a company choice, this might differ based on certain projects, or maybe some tasks within a project can be skip steps, some can't. Again, you can build your JIRA workflow for either of these, but you want to know which one you're building before you start clicking around and building it. And then a note about issues. So issues in JIRA, anything, whether they're an action item, a task, a bug, a feature, anything that you're working on, when you get down to the very basics, they're defined by two things. And one is the state. So an issue doesn't exist without a state. It's always in some status. And the other is a resolution. And we're going to talk about resolutions in more detail. These images are up here. So something like brewing coffee is pretty straightforward. It's not done, you brew it, it's done. Pretty simple process. Something like writing a blog is a lot more complicated. I first had this idea, then I'm gonna sketch out an outline, then I might write a draft. Eventually I say, okay, I'm done with this. But then other steps happen after that. So you have this resolution, this idea of done and not done, and it can be anywhere in your process. And I'll talk about that in more detail in just a minute. So you've probably already heard some very specific sounding words. If you haven't poked around in JIRA administration at all, some of these might be, not familiar, but they're very specific for a reason. And these terms are what makes JIRA so powerful. So you want to understand them before we build some workflows. So, like I just mentioned, workflow is made up of statuses. Issues always have a status, and that's how you find them. It also has these things called transitions. Transitions are how you get from one state to the next. Statuses are what I search on. I search for things that are open. I search for things that are in progress. I don't ever search for start progress. That's what I click. That's actually the only part of workflow that's functional, that users actually click on, are those transitions. Transitions are incredibly powerful. But again, going along with this terminology, the transitions have conditions. Think of these as restrictions. So just like if you don't have permission to delete something, you won't see the delete button. If I don't have permission to close, then I won't see the close button. So these are really helpful if you want to make sure, okay, not anybody can do this. I want to make sure only a certain group can do this action. Only a certain group can move it into this state. You make those using conditions. They also have validators. Think of these as kind of checkpoints. It's a way for you to have the system tell someone, hey, wait, give me this piece of data. Fill out this field before we proceed to the next step. And then they also have post functions. So these are automatic actions. Users don't have to know about post functions, but what's better is they don't have to remember to do all of these things. You can have JIRA do things for them. So I don't want to have to hit escalate issue, remember that I have to assign it to my boss, and go in and update the priority and change all this other data. I just want to hit escalate issue, and I want everything else to happen for me. You can implement these using post functions. There are a lot that are built in. There are a lot that we're going to show you some examples of them. As you get even more advanced, you might think of other really cool automatic actions that you can build on your own. And we're going to get to that. And then you just need to know, again, like I said, workflow it supersedes the idea of feature. It touches everything else in the system. When we walk through these couple of examples, you're going to see how it affects all of these other things that you'll configure. And this is probably my favorite word in JIRA Schemes. These allow you an incredibly granular level of control. You can tweak a lot of fine details. The idea of schemes is that you can build this puzzle piece, and you can build it in many different ways. And then every time you create a new project, you get to pull from all of these different puzzle pieces. So they're really handy. They allow you a lot of flexibility every time you create a new project, but they can be confusing. The best thing that I can say about schemes is just be really specific with how you name them. And I said we'd get back to resolutions. So I think of a resolution as a light switch. You create this task and you just created it. It's not done. So the light switch is off. At some point in this process, you're going to flip that switch on. You're going to say, this is now done. Steps can happen before and after that. You can put this switch anywhere that you want within your process, but you're going to put it somewhere. If I want to go back and reopen something, I can go backwards. You want to know if you want to put that somewhere in your workflow, the option to flip that switch off again and go back. And the reason that you want to put this switch somewhere, so there's this word called unresolved, and it sounds confusing. You never actually pick something as unresolved. What that means is that the field is empty. It has no value. You can give that field a value without doing it somewhere in the workflow, in the process, just by editing something. It's up to you whether you want users to do that or not. So these resolutions affect all of the reports that you're going to see in the system. It can be a little bit confusing at first. For example, this assigned to me gadget that you can put on your JIRA dashboard. The description of the gadget says, open issues that are assigned to the current user. What it actually means, issues that are assigned to the current user that have no resolution. So whether this field is empty or not is the only thing that affects this. There's also this unresolved word that you'll see all over. Again, that means that that field is empty. So you're going to want to pick a point in any process where you flip that switch and you give that field a value. So a lot of these concepts that we talked about are built into the default workflow. And I'm going to talk through it just for a second so that you know you can decide if the default workflow matches the same concepts that you want to use for your projects. So we've seen the default workflow, looks pretty straightforward. It was built with software development in mind. We were a really tiny company and we only had a few steps to go from start to finish. So that's how JIRA was built, that's how Atlassian was built. It looks pretty straightforward, but we talked about the concept of open versus restricted. Like I said, this can be a company choice. Atlassian prides itself on being a very open company. Anybody can touch the code the founder's written. You can skip steps. It's up to you what your task, what process you want to go through. When you build your JIRA workflow, you want to decide if this default matches your process. It's also based on push notifications go out, automatic actions happen. If you've installed JIRA and you've administered it, you might be familiar with a lot of the system defaults. I talked about push versus pull. You might actually know that having things be unassigned is turned off by default in the system. The default workflow matches that because things automatically get assigned and happen to issues. And then there are these last two steps. Resolved is this idea that something is done, it's finished. Closed means that it's shipped, it's in the customer's hands. So remember we talked about flipping that switch in your resolution. That actually happens in the dead center of the default workflow. So there's 2 steps before and 2 steps after this resolution. The default workflow also has a lot of these conditions, validators, post functions that we talked about that are built in. It's just good to know that they're there. They depend on a lot of the other defaults in the system, so things like permissions and notifications. So if we look at one of these transitions as an example, this is the start progress transition. and there's this condition put on it. It says only the assignee. So if you're using the default workflow and you're looking at an issue that's not assigned to you, you won't see the Start Progress button. If you are using one that's assigned to you and you do hit Start Progress, there's this post function that happens too. This resolution field is cleared. It probably is already empty, but just in case, the system is clearing it to make sure. Because it assumes, again, if you're starting progress on this issue, it's not done. So you have a couple of options when you're getting ready to build your own workflow. Again, you can copy the default workflow and make a few little tweaks, or you can build completely from scratch. You're going to want to modify the default workflow if, for example, you have that push process. We talked about things automatically happening, things automatically get assigned. If you're using a software development process, if you want to have that resolve step where something is done, but then something happens after, closed, where you actually deliver it. If you're using a lot of the other defaults in the system, because again, a lot of those are tied together for a reason. And also if you're just doing some simple tweaks. You want to build from scratch if, like our support.atlassian.com, if you've got this queue, this issues in waiting idea, or if you don't want to have to go in and strip out all those restrictions and automatic actions that happen. If you aren't using those default permissions. If you have just, one or two steps, we talked about that in intellectual property audit trail, that's just a two-step workflow, yes or no. Or if you just have a lot of steps, it's nice to be able to start with something that already has these 5 steps already built for me, but it can be difficult if you copy the default workflow and then you find yourself, plunked down in the middle of this maze, and now you have to navigate what's going in all these different directions. So it can be easier just to start from scratch. But no matter what you do, if you've heard this before, keep it simple, stupid. You want people to want to use this system. If you have 7 steps where they could use 4, they don't want to use the system. I think I actually had a conversation with someone who they started out with 77 steps before they built their workflow, and they managed to get it down to, I want to say 35, which was impressive, but that's not where you want to start. Start with as very few steps as possible, because there's always going to be something that comes up that somebody's going to say, I have to skip that, and that's such a pain in the ass. I have to go into the system and do this thing anyway. You don't want your users to have to do that. You want them to want to use this system. So start as simple as possible. So when you get ready to build your workflow, we're going to talk through 2 examples right now. There are just a couple things that you want to do before you go in and start building. So the first thing that you want to do, visualize your process. Think about these concepts that we talked about. Do you have something that's open versus restricted? Is it open at the beginning, but then maybe it's very strict towards the end? You can apply these concepts in different ways in different areas of the workflow. You're going to want to identify these other things in the system. I talked about how it can be frustrating to have to go back and do something that you forgot to do because you really had to do that first. We're going to talk about that more. You want to plan out your transitions. We talked about those very specific sounding words, conditions, validators, and post functions. That is the power of workflow. Those 3 things, they're very tiny, they're hidden, you don't see them very much, but those are by far the most powerful things about JIRA. So you want to plan them out so that you know what you're building. And then, of course, test. I know I don't have to tell you, but go in, create a few issues. Walk them through the workflow, log in as different users, make sure that things are working the way that you want them to work. So this first example is by far the most common question that I get. That's actually, I think, one of the first examples in this PDF guide. It's definitely in here. Yeah, it's the second one in here. People always want to add this step, whether it's called approval or maybe you want to call it something like verification. You want to add this one little step in the middle, but everything else you want to look like the default workflow. Visualize it out. Even though it sounds pretty simple, just draw it out and draw out your transitions. Just by making this one little map, we have a huge amount of information. This is a pretty big list of all of these things that we want to configure for this workflow. The important thing to notice about this list is that there are 6 bullet points, and the first 5 are things that you do before you click Workflow. So like I said, JIRA workflows affect everything else in the system. If you lay this out, you already know everything else in the system that you have to configure, and you're not going to get plunked down in some maze and then have to navigate your way out. If this sounds like something you want to build, if you've built it before but aren't sure that it's the way that you want to build it, if you just want workflow practice, follow this PDF guide and just walk through it. It'll only take you a few minutes, but it really gives you a good idea of how many other things in the system this workflow affects. The second example here, I'm sure some of you read our blogs on blogs.atlassian.com. We blog pretty often. There are actually 6 subsections of blogs within there. There's company news, developer, product-related stuff, and it's pretty complex, and we want it to be awesome. And we wanted a couple of other things. We wanted, first of all, a way for anybody to submit an idea. So whether you're going to be the one to write this blog or not, we just want a way that we can just capture and have this backlog of awesome ideas so that we can always work on new things. We also wanted to be able to track those ideas and what's going on, what's been published recently, what's on deck, what's still, draft in progress. And this is a screenshot of the JIRA dashboard that we've built for this. It's actually, in my opinion, the coolest JIRA dashboard that I've ever seen. It is. So again, the first thing you have to do is visualize. So we drew out this process. What do blogs have to go to get from start to finish? They go through these various steps. We know that we want to have these transitions. Remember, we talked about open versus restricted. This is a pretty strict workflow. You have to go through things in order, because in order to publish a blog, you first have to have written the draft. Just by laying this out, again, we know all of these other things in the system that we want to configure. And all of these other things in the system are what we built that really cool JIRA dashboard on. You know that you could pull reports on anything in the system, whether it's a user, a field, some sort of data anywhere. Again, look at all these bullet points. Almost everything is something that you do before you go in and click workflows and start building that. So no matter what, with any workflow, like I said, you want to go in and add this transition, wait, you have to pick your status, and wait, you have to pick your screen. So again, you want to build these things in order so you don't get frustrated. Follow this guide, visualize it out, and then when you're done, test. So everything that we've talked about so far, that's all stuff that you can do in the system straight from, just clicking on admin and clicking around, follow this guide. We have a little bit more advanced stuff. It's worth it to know that it's there even if you're never going to touch it. Again, like I said, workflows are really powerful. The first way that you can make them even more powerful are plugins. So there are hundreds of JIRA plugins out there. These are the 4 that I recommend all the time. The first 3 here are free and open source plugins. They've been around for a long time. I think some of the developers are here. The last one's a commercial, but I know they're here. So JIRA Suite Utilities, that first example that I gave, comparing this number, whether it's above or below a certain value for our PO process. We use that JIRA Suite Utilities plugin. JIRA Toolkit is a plugin that Atlassian developed a very long time ago. If you've ever used JIRA.Atlassian.com, you may have seen this participants field. You can create a feature request or file a bug for any of our products. Anytime you comment on an issue, you're captured in this little field called participants. And that allows us to do things like grant permissions and send email notifications to users that have commented on this one specific issue. Miscellaneous workflow extensions. If you want to build a workflow where you want to be able to say, okay, I've got it in this certain step, and then, hey, I need to send it to somebody, ask a question, and get it back. You don't want to have to build in, ask a question, send it back, ask a question, send it back. All of these different steps. You want to be able to just toggle back and forth. So miscellaneous workflow extensions has this thing where it remembers what it was previously and goes right back. It's a really handy workaround for that kind of process. Again, those 3 are all free and open source. The Workflow Designer plugin, it gives you, if you haven't seen it, basically you can pull these squares and arrows, build your workflows just like we've been doing it here, but have those actually be built in JIRA as you're mapping them out rather than having to do it by text. So, if you've covered all of that and you're using some plugins, you might want to take things to the next step. The first one here is something that you may have run into. Anytime that I make a tweak I make a copy of the default workflow, I add just one little thing, I add that approval step. Anytime you make a new transition, you can see the little number in parentheses next to those is different. This is really handy. What that means is that if I close an issue from open or I close an issue from approved, I can have different automatic actions happen. I can put different restrictions on those things. It allows you, again, a lot more flexible and granular control. But of course, the cost of powerful and flexible is complex. It can be confusing to keep track of those if you're building a really giant workflow. It is possible to make them the same. So if you want all of the conditions and restrictions to all be the same every time you do that transition, you can build that in XML. If you like XML, you can build all your workflows in XML. And then, of course, you can build your own plugins as well. I'm not a developer. I've never written a plugin, but I know that there are a lot of people who do. Use those existing ones as examples. If that sounds similar to something that, I'm thinking about doing this tweak and it sounds a lot like that, go ahead and get the source. Those 3 are open source. We have the JIRA Development Forum. I made these tiny links. These slides are going to be on the Summit website, I think, so they should be clickable. Grab an Atlassian and just say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing and talk through it. Or grab a partner. They build plugins for customers all the time. They do those kind of professional services, and they've probably already built something similar to what you're thinking about. So, like I said, keep things simple. Make sure that you visualize things before you go in and start clicking around. And then keep in mind the issues at the very core of an issue. It is defined by these 2 things, this resolution and this status. We actually had a customer in the office a couple of weeks ago, and he told me that he built a JIRA workflow for when they're working on projects and everybody has to stay late and they're going to order pizza for dinner. So JIRA workflows, again, they can map to any process that you have. So I hope that was helpful. I have plenty of time for questions, but I just want to put this last slide up here as well that we can leave up in the background. These 4 resources are everything that you would need to build really powerful, awesome workflows. I use all of these myself, and I'm not a developer, so they'll definitely be helpful to all of you. Yes?
Question, please. Where do the XML files for workflow that you're in, are they easily accessible?
Yeah, so the question's about where you get the JIRA Workflow XML files. So when you're within JIRA Admin, if you're looking at your workflows, you can see a list of them, and right next to them, you can just click a link that says XML. It opens it up, open it up in a text editor, and then you can either do what's called import from XML, or you can actually just copy and paste it into a box, and it'll import it for you. If you're using JIRA Hosted or JIRA Studio, then the team can import them for you as well. Yeah?
Where's the best place to go to actually learn about that whole XML program?
So the question is, where's the best place to go to learn about workflows in XML, that kind of thing? A couple of places. So I would say probably the best thing to do would be to create your own workflow in JIRA, hit the XML button and take a look at it, and then look at the default one, hit the XML button, take a look at it. If you compare those 2 side by side, you're going to see right away that there are some pretty big differences. I don't write my workflows in XML, but I know that there are some people here that do as well, so they might also know some other good resources. Yeah.
Follows an open Symphony standard. I was going to say, it follows an open standard called Open Symphony as well, so it has a descriptor that which and everything. So when you export it as XML, you can look at the top and you'll see the DTD is Open Symphony, and so that has descriptors on what you can do with elements and attributes and all that kind of stuff.
So grab Anthony if you didn't hear all that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the, yeah. So the question's about some of the properties around workflows and if there's kind of a master list. And I don't know off the top of my head if there is, but I can do a little bit of digging.
Yeah, there's some Java docs documentation on the API or whatnot, and there's
Okay.
a list there and sort of how you can construct your own properties as well.
So, yeah, the JIRA Development Hub, that first link there, that'll get you towards the API.
I actually found it by taking one of those properties and searching for it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, let me mull over that a little bit more, and I can probably grab somebody else in this room who would know it even better than I do. Yes?
In your early slide, you had a decision about $5,000 or $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
Was the workflow decision based on the value amount, based on the user decide which way the workflow is going to go?
Okay, so the question's about that PO workflow, and what was that decision based on as to the dollar amount. So that's actually using that JIRA Suite Utilities plugin. What it does is it allows you to define a number. So it's actually, I know I put 5,000, it actually is defined in our system as less than 5,001. And so it just compares it based off that any number field. So it's not like a dollar field, it's just a strict number. Other questions? Yeah. Sure. So let me see if I can jump back to one. So the question was, when you talk about conditions, validators, and post functions, where do you configure those? So the screenshot's going to be gone for me. It's when you build a workflow, you click on steps and then you build a transition. You can see the transition there when you view it. It's right below there. I made it fade because it's a lot of text and you didn't really need to. Yeah, so you actually, no, you just click on the transition title. So you click where it says close issue or resolve issue, or you click on that actual link. The transition itself is a link. I think there. I can show you after if they don't have a computer open. Got it? Fantastic. Awesome. Uh-huh. Yeah, so the question's about transition screens, and can you edit those? And actually, that's a question that I get pretty often. It's in here. I put this example, and I called it add a custom field to a screen, but you would do that if you want to make any sort of modifications to a transition screen. If you're reusing it somewhere else, you might want to just make a separate one. But what you do is when you go to edit the transition, let's do this one more time. When you're viewing that, when you click on the transition, just above where it says that, it will say transition view. There's a tiny little link. After this, I can open it up and show you. But that's where you would edit which screen you're viewing. If you want to just modify the screen that you already have, then you just go in, click Screens, and make the tweaks there. Yeah. Sure, that's actually a really good question. So the question is, there's a struggle about where do we put this resolution in our workflow, because this feature is going to go through some development work, then it's going to go to QA. Do the developers set the resolution right when they're done, even though it's still going to be in testing? So the short answer is there are a lot of options. My recommendations would be, think about what you want to get in the end. What kind of dashboard or report, or what are you trying to build this off based on in the end? And what do you want to see on that project screen? When you click on project, when you see those unresolved issues, do you want things that are in QA to show up there as unresolved or as resolved? So think about what kind of reports you're going to build, and then from there decide how you want to set that resolution. Does that make sense?
One of the problems is you have to share all the resolutions with every project. So if you start to get into complex workflows that maybe have QA complete, dev complete, PM review complete or something, it just gets sloppy because when someone needs to resolve something, you got to scroll through and find dev complete. So that's just one of the challenges that I have for what you're saying.
Definitely, yeah. So he just mentioned that resolutions are global in JIRA. So anytime you resolve an issue, when you click that field, you see all the resolutions in the whole system. That's definitely a really high feature request to be able to configure those per project. So if the JIRA dev team's in here, grab them, let them know. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a JIRA property that can do that. If you add it to your transaction, you should be able to hide some of those resolutions.
Yeah, I've heard about one or two ways that you can kind of hack that and hide some of them. But yeah, that's definitely something that you do have to work around sometimes.
Workaround for that actually.
Okay.
We created a custom field called, internal resolution, and that has context for project or issue type. And the point where we copy the value of that field into system resolution as a post function.
She just mentioned the copy value from another field post function. That's part of one of those plugins. That's part of the JIRA Suite Utilities plugin that I showed you earlier. That's actually a good workaround. All right, I think we have maybe a minute or two left. One more question. Uh-huh. Yeah, so the question is about visualizing workflows. If you want to show to an end user, show them that map of what the process is. There are a few different ways to do that. There's an old plugin, it's called Workflow Visualize or something like that, but I don't think it works in the current version. There are at least one or two plugins that are around workflow design specifically. So like the Workflow Designer plugin that I mentioned, I believe that the Minya plugin is implementing that as well. So those are worth checking out. But if you're just using a piece of paper and drawing it out for yourself beforehand anyway, which you should be doing before you build your workflows,